Mr. President of Iceland, dear guests. Now we come to the point where Mr. Mead Treadwell, President of PD Capital, former Lieutenant Governor of Alaska, he's here to tell us about the Arctic Circle Task Force on Shipping and Ports. Please welcome Mr. Treadwell.
Good morning. Mr. President, ministers, I'm honored to join this regional meeting of the Arctic Circle to give an update on the Arctic Circle Task Force on Shipping and Ports. Let me make sure I can move this forward. The Shipping and Ports Task Force is a unique project in the Arctic Circle, which was established to promote investment towards safe, secure, and reliable Arctic shipping. And our manner of working reflects the Arctic Circle as an open NGO. If you've been to the large meetings held in Iceland, many different groups convene to work on issues, and this reflects the Arctic Circle as an open, non-governmental organization convening like-minded people in a democratic manner. We announced the Shipping and Ports Task Force at regional meetings in Anchorage, in Singapore, the meeting in Iceland last October, and we've had many different people from Arctic Council member nations, observer nations, expressed interest in being part of the task force from government, the academic level, and the corporate level. And we've had discussions with those who are preparing for the Finnish chairmanship of the Arctic Council. We believe the timing of our work leading up to some culmination reports late this year is right for the Finnish chairmanship. And we also have a very interesting situation in the Arctic today with regard to shipping. You heard very important announcements yesterday, especially the very important announcement about the partnership between Eimskip and Royal Arctic Line. Just earlier this spring, you heard an announcement by China about a national Arctic policy to take much greater advantage of Arctic shipping. You heard from Korea Maritime Institute yesterday about work that Korea Maritime Institute has done. And I happened to be in Korea at the time of President Grimson's visit with the President of Korea. And President Park has been outspoken in her interest from Asian capitals on the value of Arctic shipping. And Mr. President, I thought the communique at the end of your meeting there was very important. You've seen an announcement at the Arctic Circle last fall of Japan's new Arctic policy. You heard from Minister Tan yesterday from Singapore about how the importance of shipping to Singapore's economy and the interest of Singapore in watching and helping to guide the growth of Arctic shipping. The United States just released a major report on infrastructure needs in the Arctic and placed at the top of that list, coming out of the Department of Transportation, the development of ports and refuge and infrastructure for shipping. That includes Port Clarence, a project which you've heard about in other Arctic Circle issues. And even in the last year, the Russian government announced that it had hired a set of consultants to take the Northern Sea Route administration and see what they could do to play a larger role in the global shipping market. And I think we're all interested to see that report come along. And finally, you have some new major drivers in Arctic shipping coming along, especially the construction going on right now of new ice-breaking LNG tankers to bring gas from the Yamal region through the Bering Strait into Asian markets, as well as a number of others looking at liquefied natural gas sources on the North American coast that might well go to Asian markets. And so I would say that while the numbers are down, the activity on Arctic shipping continues to grow. And this chart that was initially part of some of the discussions that we had in the Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment, whether it's the Northeast Passage, the yellow line, the Northwest Passage, the green line, or the increasing capability with icebreaker support to use the transpolar routes, it is something that's very appropriate for us to be working on. Just to go back on a little bit of history, in 2009, 8 Arctic nations set a safety agenda for Arctic shipping. I was then chairman of the U.S. Arctic Research Commission, and we paid for this report, which was written by 8 nations, co-chaired by 3. And the safety agenda that was established in 2009, we have seen lots of activity to move forward on that safety agenda. Before the 2009, of course, there was the Article 234, Law of the Sea, which took special knowledge of the fact that in ice-covered waters, measures are needed for protecting the environment with the growth of shipping, with a unique provision in international law that said that coastal states can require itinerant vessels going by to be part of a pollution prevention regime. You've seen Russian, Canadian, U.S. legislation, the national parties, the policies that I mentioned. We had the Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment. We had the 2 binding agreements, the Arctic Council Search and Rescue Agreement, which was signed here in this city in 2011. I was here with the foreign ministers when they did that, and the Arctic Council Oil Spill Agreement in 2013. We now have the IMO Polar Code becoming effective, and quite a bit of additional work by PAIM and our Coast Guards in the North cooperating on a much stronger level than they have in the past. We recently had a forum in Washington at the Wilson Center on implementation of the Polar Code, and I will say that for many of the concerns that people had about safety in the Arctic, implementation of this law is very important for equipment, design and construction, operations and manning, and we should congratulate ourselves that the result of meetings like this on a non-governmental sector, the result of the governmental meetings, the result of the hard work that has brought us to a much stronger level of safety on Arctic shipping than we had when the initial report came out in 2009. So now let me get back to the task force for a second. The Shipping and Ports Task Force was established with 3 goals. One was to establish a League of Arctic Ports, to try to have Arctic ports across the world, and these are either ports that may be in the mind of promoters to actually happen, such as Port Clarence in Alaska or Finnafjord in Iceland, or existing ports which have the possibility to expand. The idea of having the Arctic ports work together was one concept. A second was to determine options for an Arctic seaway regime. There is a Northern Sea Route administration, but it doesn't seem to be catching hold in the marketplace, and so one of the questions is how might we have international cooperation on an Arctic seaway? And then third, we said we wanted to support Arctic infrastructure investment in general, and you heard a very good panel on that from the financiers yesterday. On the first goal, establishing a League of Arctic Ports, the idea would be to bring ports serving the Arctic as well as ports in the Arctic to the table. The goal is to advocate for necessary infrastructure and customers to help convince the global shipping community that there is the capability for reliable service. Paul Foos, who is formerly the mayor of Unalaska Dutch Harbor, probably Alaska's gateway port to the Arctic Ocean, a former Commissioner of Commerce, will lead that effort. And we've decided through the task force to try to do a pre-meeting of the Arctic Circle meeting coming up in October, where port individuals would be invited to come the day before the Arctic Circle meeting begins in Iceland and result with a declaration of a League of Arctic Ports and move on from that. There has been a draft set of bylaws and guides that will go out to task force members and go out to port officials very soon. And the idea here is to have an organization that will advocate for safe, secure, reliable Arctic shipping. On the second goal of establishing a seaway, I think we've got a little bit more work to do, and I say this as president of an investment bank and private equity fund. This is really one of the most difficult business plans I've ever had a chance to work on. But I will say that the idea of an Arctic seaway regime is related to other initiatives that governments and private industry have taken together in the past, and I'm going to talk a little bit about COMSAT and the St. Lawrence. We have a couple of tough questions, some of which were referred to by Dr. Bergman's talk yesterday. Tough questions on icebreaker configuration and a business model. I like to think of the Arctic Ocean as a deep, dark woods. And if you want to get across the deep, dark woods without being caught by the wicked witch, is it better to have a convoy of ships going across with several icebreakers taking you across on a schedule? Or is it better to have a set of lamp posts, maybe pickets, 5 or 6 icebreakers there to do a zone-by-zone effort? Either way, icebreakers cost money. You can get a medium-class icebreaker in this world from Finnish sources, from American sources, from Russian sources, from Asian sources for $30 to $40 million a year. $30 to $40 million a year times 6 icebreakers is $250 million a year. If the savings from our Arctic crossing is such that you could charge a couple of $100,000 for a crossing, you would only need a couple of hundred crossings in order to pay for the icebreaker escort system that would provide the safety and the security and the reliability. And most of the rulemaking that's happened in the past has basically said, let's build the ship capacity through the Polar Code, let's have the search and rescue capacity, but no one has said, okay, what can we do cooperatively to put up a shingle to say we're going to have icebreaker service to get you through the deep, dark woods? And that's the question. One of the questions is, once you figure out from ice conditions and availability of icebreakers what kind of configuration you need and what the business model is the legal standing issue. Because frankly, this is an open ocean to any comer from around the world. Well, Russia insists that they have the legal capacity, and I believe under Article 234 they do have the legal capacity to charge a tariff to use those waters, and Canada likewise. The United States and other nations have said, no, this is an open ocean, open to innocent passage. So we've also had discussions with the insurance community. And some members of the insurance community have said, if we see such a regime, a seaway regime, get into place, then we will tell people that insurance costs are much less if you use this regime. So these are some of the kinds of options that you'll see in the option papers for the workshop, for the task force. We're planning a workshop in Washington, D.C. prior to the Arctic Circle. Alice Rogoff and I have been working to enlist the Wilson Center in that regard. And we hope to have a further workshop in this with the Arctic Circle regional meeting in Quebec. I think that's a very appropriate place to do this because Quebec is where the St. Lawrence Seaway comes in. And this whole effort is being co-chaired by former Alaska Senate President and former Bush administration cabinet member Drew Pearce, who's very active in Arctic affairs, and I'm thankful that she's taken this on. Let me go to 2 analogs very quickly as I move to conclude the talk about how the planet has come together before when something brand new has happened to make something happen. In 1962, the United States Congress passed a Communications Act which said create a company called COMSAT. Have that company go out to the ministries of Post and Telecom around the world, and let's see if we can float an issue on Wall Street and raise enough money to put up enough satellites that we would have satellite-based telecommunication for data, for television, for voice around the world. Within 10 years, only with that mandate from Congress, we got to a system of satellites which was launched By 1972, it was a successful reality, and 49 countries joined to have phone service work, and that was because of new technology. Where we are today is we have a new ocean. We have a newly accessible ocean. And so we are working with some legislators, some parliamentarians in several different countries where we floated the concept of a ComSat-type piece of legislation, which says, let's start a service that would have the icebreakers available and see if ultimately this can be a public-private partnership. But I use the ComSat example as one notion. Another is the St. Lawrence Seaway, and let me just say about this seaway. The St. Lawrence River, as you know, comes in the Gulf of St. Lawrence in Quebec, goes into the Great Lakes, and is used by international traffic constantly. A ship going from the Gulf of St. Lawrence to, say, Duluth in Lake Superior would cross the U.S.-Canada border 23 different times. But the two nations have gotten together and have said, we will offer a consistent service together to have safe, secure, reliable shipping. And likewise, as part of the inspiration for the League of Arctic Ports, you have all of these ports where you have these red dots. They may compete with each other to put goods on or off the water, but they cooperate with each other in promoting the seaway. And so that concept of the seaway is a model. We've drafted parallel legislation, though you could do it also by international agreement. It has a revenue and a regulatory model to support the work that it needs. It has support from insurers and salvors. And as you apply this model to the Arctic, we have to respect legal differences in water status. And again, I refer to UNCLOS Article 234 as one method to get us around that. The last goal of the task force is to support Arctic infrastructure investment. And frankly, we've done less of our own original work there, except that we included this because the idea of financing mechanisms we thought was important to achieve the other two goals. We heard yesterday a very good panel on finance. We heard the concept of trigger investments in the north. We heard the need for scale where multiple players, in the case of Arctic shipping, the cost is in low single-digit billions. And you couldn't turn a mile of dirt in Panama for what it would cost to get the icebreakers in place to offer reliable Arctic service. We heard that reliability promotes investability, and so the task force really wants to support the process that Scott Minerd laid out yesterday and that we've been working on together at the World Economic Forum. The Arctic is an emerging market. GDP in the Arctic has grown consistently at a much higher rate than the GDPs of most industrialized nations around the world. And it's likely that we're going to see a GDP in the Arctic of over $500 billion by 2030 by some estimates that we made at PT Capital. We believe this growth is going to happen because of resources, associated development, sea routes and trade, and technology advances. The Arctic has potential to do more. Right now, we help feed the world, we fuel the world, we provision the world, we protect the world, we help connect the world, and I'd say that the growth of tourism is evidence we help inspire the world. But other Arctic links are on the way, and I just leave this to say that while we talk about sea routes, it's very important to consider what we're doing on sea routes in the context of what we heard yesterday on air routes. What we are hearing about the extension of airports, especially here in Greenland. There's new technology been announced, and one Arctic player that's bought a series of airships under construction. There are some major rail extensions underway, new fiber optic lines across the Arctic on the drawing board, some going into construction this summer. Iridium will be launching 70 new satellites this year that will increase the telecom communications capability in the Arctic. We're hearing interest of transshipment ports, ports of refuge, large projects on HVDC power, and of course pipelines, LNG and FLNG. My point is this, is that the concept of biting the bullet and coming together to say what kind of regime can we establish in the Arctic to have safe, secure, and reliable shipping, the timing is very ripe. And in the context of the other kinds of major links happening here, these are the trigger investments that will bring sustainable economic growth to this part of the world. So I conclude really with this progress report with a continued invitation. If you are interested in being part of this, we will be sending out a series of papers for comment. We will be inviting you to the League of Ports meeting before the Arctic Circle meeting in Iceland, as well as the workshops. And frankly, I can tell you that we cannot do this alone. It's been a shoestring effort, but one where we've attracted the interest of parliamentarians and governments across the world, and I'm very excited to be able to give you this report today and would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Treadwell. Thank you very much. Now to come with some conclusions or looking at the future perspectives. There are three. We are going back to ending the circle like we began. It is the next one who's coming up is His Excellency Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson, President of Iceland. After that is the Minister for Industry, Labor and Trade and Foreign Affairs, Mr. Vitus Kojágitsson, and Chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, Okalik Igijia. Mr. President, welcome.
President of the Parliament of Greenland, ministers, dear friends, as we come to the end of this remarkable forum, and in the light of what Mead Treadwell has outlined for us just now, let me, before I address where and how we move forward from this Greenland Forum, try to put our gathering into a historical and geographical perspective. As we all know, for centuries, when Europe and North America were moving through the evolution of philosophical thought and transformation in the nature of the states, the Arctic was still a completely unknown part of the world to the so-called enlightened leaders of the Western world. Of course, for thousands of years, the people of the Arctic had lived their lives and established their customs and their economic way of interacting with nature. But it was not really until the beginning of the 20th century, when the so-called Western explorers from Norway, from Canada, and other parts of the world started to travel into the Arctic, that the leadership and the enlightened parts of the European and the American world discovered the Arctic. And that's why the explorers became world famous, because what they had brought to the attention was so new. And then, as we all know, following the Second World War, when the Cold War imprisoned the entire dialogue and the cooperation on the global stage, the Arctic was again closed due to the military tension and the buildup of arms and confrontation across the Arctic. So it is really, and it's quite remarkable, in the last 30 years or so, in the history of mankind, that this big part of the planet has been opened up to wide-ranging, constructive, both Arctic and global cooperation. Never before in the history of the planet has such an enormous part of the Earth so suddenly opened up to cooperation, research, economic activity, and political dialogue. It was mentioned yesterday that the size of the Arctic is similar to the African continent. And in the meeting in Singapore, I referred to the analogy that to some extent what is happening in the Arctic in the last 20 or 30 years is as if we suddenly came to Africa as a challenge of how to organize and cooperate with that big part of our planet. We are indeed here today and at the Greenland Forum and elsewhere where Arctic dialogue takes place, discussing for the first time as human race how we deal with this enormous challenge of organizing such a huge part of our planet in constructive and positive way while we pay respect to the people of the Arctic and the sustainability of the planet. It is therefore difficult to present clearly the scope of this task that we face. And as we progressed 15, 20 years ago in the early stages of the Arctic dialogue, there were, of course, meetings and forums, but they were small in number. They were not connected together. They were specialized in nature. And some of us realized 4 years ago that if we were going to succeed in this effort, we had to transform the way we came together. So by issuing an invitation, open and democratic to each and every one, we would create a platform of consistency and continuation where everybody representing the global stakeholders and the partners in the Arctic could come together on their own terms with their own idea, and also not just the Arctic states, but also people from Africa and Asia and other parts of the world for whom the Arctic is indeed also their global neighborhood because of the effect of the weather systems, the rising sea levels, as well as the great importance for the economy, the global economy of the 21st century. And thus, as we all know, we established the Arctic Circle and announced at the National Press Club in Washington in April of 2013 that this was our intention. And we scheduled the first assembly some months later in Reykjavik in October of that year. There were many who said to us, this could never be done. It was an impossibility to announce in April in Washington at this important international venue, the National Press Club, our intention, and then about a half a year later, invite the world to come to Reykjavik for the first meeting. But we all know what happened. Not only did people come, but in the first 3 years, the Arctic Circle assemblies have become the largest annual international gathering on the Arctic. Last year, with over 2,000 participants from more than 50 countries. An assembly addressed by the President of France, François Hollande, because he recognized the strong link between the success of the Paris climate negotiations and the future of the Arctic. That was the reason why he came to our forum. Not just because the President of France needed yet another platform to make a speech, but because he was on a mission, and France was on a mission to bring the world together in the needed and the urgent climate agreement, which would enable every nation and every country and every continent to move forward together. And in connection to the assemblies, we decided also a year ago or so that in order to broaden this network, we had to create forums in other parts of the world, smaller in number, more specialized, but also in the spirit of inviting others to come to this dialogue in their own way. And we started in Alaska in August, talking about ports and shipping. And as a result of that meeting, we have now decided, as Mead Treadwell so excellently explained, to invite anybody interested and concerned about the future way of organizing shipping and ports in this big part of the planet to come together within the Arctic Circle family to formulate not just policies and vision, but also concrete forms of cooperation. And in November, the government of Singapore graciously co-hosted with us the first Asian Forum on the Arctic, where representatives from China, Japan, Korea, and other parts of Asia came together with many of us to explain the vision and the engagement of these leading Asian countries in the Arctic. It was perhaps paradoxical for many to go to Singapore to talk about the Arctic. But the core of the reason is that if the ice sheet in Greenland continues to melt, and if only about a quarter of the Greenland ice sheet in this century or the next will melt into the ocean, Singapore, as they know it, and Singapore, as we know it, will no longer exist. It is the ultimate threat of survival to that beautiful, successful, and extraordinary country. The forum here in Greenland marks, however, as we have witnessed today and yesterday and on the opening day, a transformative way of bringing this dialogue to the people of the Arctic, their representatives and their communities in a way that would perhaps have been impossible some years ago. This forum here in Nuuk is not only the largest international gathering on the Arctic ever to take place in Greenland, perhaps the largest international conference of this scale ever to take place in this country. But it's also the first Arctic conference where the representatives of so many indigenous communities in different parts of the Arctic come together to present their vision, their experience, their proposals, their projects, and their solutions. This forum has transformed the role of the indigenous people in the future dialogue of the Arctic, because we all know, and let us admit it, that in previous Arctic conferences and dialogue, the participation by the indigenous communities has been more limited and more restricted, and perhaps only in the person of few leaders from the entire Arctic. So therefore, at the closing of these extraordinary days, I want to thank the government of Greenland for their engagement, for their vision, and all the people here in Nuuk who have organized this together with us, the young generation, both from the Arctic Circle Secretariat and from the government here in Nuuk, who have actually brought this together. Some of us have given perhaps some guidance, but it is quite remarkable that it's a new young generation which has been the backbone of bringing this conference together and executing it in the days and the weeks before it happened, but also during our presence here now. Where do we go from here? Last night, the foreign minister and I discussed the idea, which I mentioned briefly in my opening speech, that in the light of this success, we should aim at the second Greenland Arctic Circle Forum. Perhaps in 2 years' time or so. We will decide finally in the coming months. But by doing so, we would also send a signal that this is a part of a journey. This has now become an integral dimension in our roadmap that takes the Arctic dialogue not just to Reykjavik every October to the large assembly, but also again to Greenland as well as to other parts of the world and to Quebec in November. Thereby, we are sending to the entire world that for the first time in the history of the Arctic, we now have an integrated system of coming together in one event after another, not only annually in Reykjavik, but then in other parts of the Arctic and other parts of the world. So constructively, we can change the Arctic in a positive way. And we have seen here in Nuuk, in the agreement between Eimskip and the Royal Arctic Line, how leading companies that organize the movement of goods and transport and shipping across the Arctic oceans can come together under the Arctic Circle umbrella and transform the way of doing business and communicating, which most of us thought impossible only a few years ago. We also saw in the representatives of the different airlines how they are presenting a vision of a new way of linking people together and opening the Arctic up to successful tourism based on pro-business airline activity. These two networks of shipping and air transport that have been explained and furthered during this dialogue is a very strong signal that we are not just talking about some ideas and visions of the Arctic. We are doing within our framework of the Arctic Circle concrete things. We are transforming the Arctic as well as the links of the Arctic to the rest of the world. And if the task force on ports and shipping succeed in the coming months and the next 2 years or so, we will also see yet another example. So what I think we have witnessed here at the forum in Greenland is how this framework of cooperation we created 3 years ago can now become the tent within which various partners, whether they are governments or companies or research institutions, come together and agree of cooperating in a new way, and thereby sending the signal that this is not just a talking shop. This is a forum to change the Arctic and the world in a responsible and sustainable way. And by, as we did this morning, including the urgent and the needed discussion on mental health and health services in the Arctic, we are also sending the signal that it's not just in the field of economics and business that we need to come together. We have to link our healthcare system and our experiences in a way that we make sure that the young people in the Arctic feel in their hearts and their minds that they have a bright and good and exciting future. And the perspective, as I mentioned in my opening speech, and we have seen concretely in many presentations here today, that the geographical connection between my country, Greenland, and Canada also demonstrates that in practical terms, this can be made more beneficial, quicker, but also more sustainable as new systems of helping people in education and health and bringing businesses together. But above all, the forum here in Greenland, together with the other activities of the Arctic Circle, is sending a very important signal to the rest of the world. Is that now we have established a regular mechanism of bringing the people of the Arctic and those from other parts of the world who share our concerns and want to cooperate, bring them together in a new and productive way. Mead Treadwell mentioned the World Economic Forum at the end of his speech. That was a platform which was created 40 years ago and which helped at the end of the Cold War to bring both new free countries in Central and Eastern Europe, but also countries in Asia and Africa into the global dialogue of economic progress and political cooperation. Without making the necessary analogy, perhaps, but to some extent, what we have created here and at the other Arctic Circle gatherings, and will do in October in Reykjavik and in November in Quebec and then on, is to create a kind of a similar platform which links the Arctic to the rest of the world and brings the rest of the world to the Arctic in a new and constructive way. And although the assemblies have been important in demonstrating this success and this new model, I feel that the forum here in Greenland has provided a core addition to this international cooperation beyond anything that even the most optimistic of all of us could have hoped for. There is something fundamentally strong and new about how Greenland came through this forum into this dialogue, and how the other representatives of the indigenous people also embraced through their participation this new way of coming together. And when we link that to the extraordinary presentation at the end of yesterday by these leading representatives of some of the largest financial entities in the world, we have seen here in Greenland something that all of us thought impossible even 2 or 3 years ago. So that is why I will go back to Iceland and, together with all of you, continue this journey full of inspiration and optimism about what we have achieved here in Nuuk. And as we go forward, the forum in Greenland will be a milestone in proving and demonstrating, not just to the people of the Arctic, but to everybody else in the rest of the world, that we have indeed entered a new journey, that there is indeed a new era, even an epoch, in the future of the Arctic and its place in the world. So I want to thank all of you for having made this possible. It's been a long journey for those who have come from other countries. We have all made sacrifices in order to be here. But I hope you also leave with a sense of inspiration and optimism that I feel in my heart. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Mr. Vitus Kojakutsa, Minister. You can present yourself, Vitus. We have met you before. Welcome.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank His Excellency President Olafur Ragnar Grimsson for bringing the Arctic Circle to Greenland. It has been a pleasure for the government of Greenland to take part of the Greenland Forum. It has been a pleasure of meeting you all for the past couple of days. We have seen people all the way from Australia, from Singapore, from China, from South Korea, from US, from Canada, in various provinces in Canada, from Iceland, Norway, Germany, Denmark, etc. The world has come to Nuuk, and I must say that this Arctic Circle Greenland Forum has been an historic event for several reasons. For the past 3 years, where the Arctic Circle has been conducted under the leadership of President Grimsson, the topics of the Arctic has been raising and broadened, and Arctic has become a more household topic, not only politically, but economically and culturally. And I think Greenland Forum has given a new dimension to the Arctic Circle, because it has given a more human dimension, as we tend to say in the government of Greenland. when the Arctic rises in discussions, in historic perspectives, the conquerors of the Arctic are mentioned on the basis of the explorers who has come to the Arctic. It is a raredom and seldom that the people who have brought the explorers to conquer the Arctic are mentioned or even unmentioned in many occasions. This also happens today, where the peoples of the Arctic are forgotten in many ways, which is why it is important to have the Greenland Forum. The government of Greenland was committed to arrange the Greenland Forum and started to plan it since last year, and we have been committed to the Greenland Forum from the very beginning. We have been committed to give the Arctic Circle a more dimension in regards to including the people of the Arctic, not only in terms of discussions. It is important to gather people who reside in the Arctic and include them in the discussions, in the science work, in the investments, etc. If we are to create any growth or development in the Arctic, then we must include the people who live in the Arctic. And we are happy that the Inuit Circumpolar Council has been part of the planning and the execution of this forum. And we thank the commitment that we have seen by all the participants during the past couple of days. We are truly privileged to see the scholars, the investors, lawyers, operators, politicians, etc., representing the peoples of the Arctic. The Arctic Circle provides a window of what life is about in the Arctic. It provides us a voice to be heard, and it gives us an opportunity to give you some clues about the opportunities in business, in economics, what can be done in the Arctic. As we have seen for the past couple of days, there has been sessions where we have seen the vast opportunities to do business in the Arctic and to invest in the Arctic. The Arctic possesses many resources that can be used to further development, to further commodities for the rest of the world. And I think this forum has given a few clues on how we can work together to promote an even closer relationship between the neighboring Arctic countries, not least amongst the companies presiding in the Arctic. But this has given us also an opportunity to develop the relationships, as we have seen yesterday with our shipping companies between Royal Arctic Line and Imship. It is possible to do business, and it is possible to have a closer relationship. And we are happy that you have taken time to come here to Nuuk and be part of this important event. As Mr. Clemson said, we are discussing how we can promote the Arctic Circle Greenland Forum in the future. And I'm sure that my government will discuss the possibility to take the necessary steps to organize a similar event. There are many topics that we haven't reached during this forum, and I'm sure that when we evaluate what can be done next, I'm sure that we will be wiser and more accommodating to what has been missing for the next event. It has been important for the government of Greenland to facilitate the frames in order to have a fluent dialogue, but also to introduce how life is in Greenland and what business is to be done in Greenland. But the most important gift we have given is, of course, that we have allowed to interact with you for the past couple of days, and we are happy of given this opportunity to be with you, and we thank you all of you for the commitment and the inspiration you all have given. You have all enriched our life, and we thank you for your contribution, and have a safe trip back home. And we look forward of seeing you in near future, and thank you.
And now, Okalek Igisiak Takanna.
Qilnimik sivluqama qai pigaaqutigiku taikua inusilere qauyut atserunnartumi kapaqqaugatsi sulijornartusi upigusutungalitsinni. I'd like to acknowledge the previous panel that was up here before I start. They talked about very important issues that I often bring up and Inuit often bring up about mental health, suicide prevention, suicide, and all those social issues that Inuit face. It just goes to show how healing should be partly considered as capacity building. Healing should be partly considered as economic development, because when we heal as Inuit in our communities, we contribute more to the community and the global economy. The minister just reminded me too that there's usually very important fellow Inuit missing in these forums. That is our Chikaka fellow Inuit. They are often unable to come to these forums because of funding and because of their political reality. So I shouldn't forget our Chikaka fellow Inuit. We're almost at the end of this forum, I think. I think we've all listened, shared, and I'm sure we learned from each other today and this week. On Tuesday, I urge you to leave this forum with new partners to shift your views of the Arctic and move beyond the challenges of the changing Arctic to imminent opportunities. We must be bound by a foundation that ensures safer and sustainable Arctic in 2030 as we look towards a comprehensive Arctic policy, our economic endeavors, and a shared future. Like the previous panel reminded us, I must remind you that looking ahead can be challenging for many Inuit. It's very difficult. Okay. It's very difficult when your home is crowded, moldy, and inefficient. When you spend most of your money on heating and feeding your family. Often with store-bought food that is not as nutritious as our country food. From the land, the lakes, and the sea. When mental health issues in your communities is an epidemic, and your youth are committing suicide. Not to mention the school rates, the graduation rates. Taking all this into consideration is daunting. However, all of the elements of our reality has not discouraged Inuit. We continue to have optimism about our future, especially when we have forums such as this. And I hope this is not just talk. A couple of weeks ago, I had the privilege to be in our northernmost community of Canada, in Grise Fiord, the home of about 120 Inuit, as well as to Pond Inlet, which has about 1,600 Inuit. They welcomed Kupi Kleist, Eva Ariak, and myself as commissioners of the Greenland Canada Pikalaksuaq Commission. Beyond the beauty of the region were the incredible people who were exiled, forcibly located from northern Quebec to the far north to secure sovereignty for Canada. They spoke of terrible conditions, despair, and death. Then they spoke of their amazing relationship with Greenlandic Inuit and how they wanted the Greenlanders who had crossed from Qaanaaq to visit kin and hunt and to stay with them. They spoke of the spirit of their community in the face of all manner of challenges, such as relocation, residential schools, starvation. They showed that Inuit can overcome any hardship if we maintain kinship ties to our communities in Greenland, Canada, Alaska, and Chikaka. If we can achieve the same level of healthcare, education, opportunity afforded to other peoples in our countries. If we are able to live on, harvest our wildlife, and maintain our relationship to our land. If our knowledge system is valued and used alongside other knowledge systems for evidence-based decision-making. If we have the respect for and recognition of our cultural practices from national and the international community we live in. If we have our rights respected and recognized. And if we have, and when we have the free, prior, and informed consent over any action that impacts our lives, lands, and resources. Just to go back to the beginning where I talked about the capacity building, it was a little bit more adding to the daunting, I guess, when the shipping guy was up here, Mr. Mead, I think. And he talked about 200 plus more ships, I think he said, on top of what is happening now that will increase. If he gets all the resources, if you get all the resources that you want, that's in addition to all the activity that's happening right now in our communities. Inuit have an established system of governance, and as I noted on Tuesday, we welcome partnerships and relationships that genuinely recognize our human rights as affirmed in international instruments. The ICC recognizes the advances made by various Arctic states to recognize and respect the rights of Indigenous peoples. And in particular, we welcome the Canadian government's recent announcement to adopt and implement the UN Declaration without qualification. In this context, we urge other Arctic Rim countries to actively commit to the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and to make an investment in the work of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples. Also, to actively commit to the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol, Convention on Biodiversity, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Paris Agreement adopted under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the World Intellectual Property Organization and the Intergovernmental Committee on Intellectual Property and Genetic Resources, Traditional Knowledge and Folklore. And for those that have not done so, to consider ratification of the International Labour Organization Convention 169 on Indigenous People and Tribal Peoples. In addition, Indigenous peoples from all corners of the globe have called for substantial resources to collaborate with the UN and its agencies, funds, and programs to ensure their direct participation in achieving the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. We know that one sure way of empowering Inuit is to meaningfully implement the right to free, prior, and informed consent as affirmed in the UN Declaration. The Declaration and other international human rights instruments elaborate upon the need to ensure that Indigenous peoples have heard, discussed, and prioritized whether or not they will give or withhold their consent, and determine for themselves the nature of safe and sustainable use of their resources. Without the effective implementation of this important international standard, we will continue to see our issues rise to the highest reaches of our courts, as seen, for example, by the community of Clyde River, who is currently challenging the seismic testing because of the fears they have for its impacts on marine mammals surrounding their waters. I'm very proud to say that I'm part of that region and initiated some of that work. The simple message is, talk with us, not to us. Hear what we have in our minds and in our hearts. Learn what our concerns are, and include us in the decision-making at every level and at every stage. If such steps are taken in good faith, then we probably won't need to go to the courts to defend our rights. Inuit have a will for sustainable and equitable development. However, it has to be in accordance with our aims, our values, our ethics, and on the basis of fair conditions and real partnership. This is not a lot to ask for. After all, the Arctic is our homeland. We live here, and we intend to ensure that our future generations will live here as well. As the world looks northward for resources, shipping, fisheries, and tourism, Inuit must be heard. We must be part of any decision-making in and for our Nunat. I think you've heard this week, that we have a wealth of untapped knowledge. Tuesday, I opened the door to positive change, to productive and respectful partnerships, to working together for a sustainable and more secure Arctic. Today, I urge you to walk through it. Let's show the rest of the world progress by implementing international instruments, conventions, and agreements, by implementing national agreements and building capacity at the local level. Several have said that the activity is increasing and increasing due to climate change. Put another way, I hope activity is increasing because we are fostering relationships with Arctic peoples. By 2030, Mr. Mead said there would be $500 billion additional dollars or GDP or something to that effect, should the activity that they're expecting be there. How much of that will stay in the Arctic? As Monica lightly, very eloquently finished with her presentation earlier, Minister El Kalanyok, Ataw sumik inu katigita lakayok ilagay ako malyaka Ataw sumik inu katigi simayuto kalugata inu katigita. I can't translate that. Thanks, Monica, and Kuyanami.
Thank you. Thank you for providing us with an insight into possible future perspectives for the development of the Arctic. Please give His Excellency Oliver Ragnar Grimsson, Mr. Vitus Kujakitsok, and Ms. Okalik Igia a big applause. While I'm making some closing remarks, I would recommend you to get a headset because there will be a little, you will have to use it in a moment. So while I'm saying a few words, please fetch some headsets. The program here in the main hall is now coming to an end, and I would therefore like to use the opportunity to thank the organizers for this very interesting and thought-provoking couple of days. It has been a privilege being a part of this forum, and I'm sure the participants agree with me on that. On behalf of us all, I would like to thank the organizers, the Arctic Circle, and the Government of Greenland, and especially His Excellency, Mr. Kim Kielsen, the Premier of Greenland, for inviting us to Nuuk. The forum has given us all an opportunity to learn more about Arctic issues and each other's. Please give our host, Mr. Kielsen, the Premier of Greenland, a round of applause. Let me also remind that the Arctic Circle Assembly, just put it in your calendar, the dates are in Reykjavik. Arctic Assembly in Reykjavik is 7th to 9th of October, and the Arctic Circle Forum in Quebec will be December 11th to 13th. So now you know. We will soon have lunch here in Qatuaq, and afterwards we move over to the University of Greenland, where we will continue the forum. The organizers of the side event there are the University of Greenland and Greenland Business. And they have set up a program for us with an emphasis on innovation in the Arctic. And please note that shuttle buses will be waiting outside from 12:45 to take us to the university. But before we leave this hall for lunch, we have a very special event I would like to invite you to take a part in. Please welcome Mr. Lars Emil Johansen, the President of Parliament of Greenland, Inatsisartut. Takanna.
Mr. President, Mr. Premier, ladies and gentlemen, dear all participants of Arctic, what does we call it? Arctic Forum here in Greenland. Arctic Circle here in Greenland. As you can hear, my English is not very good, so I normally give my speeches in my own language or in Danish. So please allow me to give my speech not in Greenlandic, because I think it is important that I can give my speech in a language that both Mr. President Olavur Ragnar Grimson and I can understand. So I will give the speech in the Danish. I hope that you will forgive me for doing it. I'm sure that the interpreters will give you an excellent interpretation. Kære præsident Olafur Ragnar Grimson, kære gæster. Det er en meget stor ære på vegne af Grønlands parlament i Inatsisartut at kunne byde dem og alle tilstedeværende hjertelig velkommen til denne specielle højtidelighed, hvor de, herre Mr. Præsident, overrækkes når sådan nat i guld. Denne hædersbevisning overrækkes til dem, herre præsident, som en anerkendelse af dem, som ven af Grønland, som ven af Arktis, som jeg vil tillade mig at kalde dem Mr. Arktis. Indledningsvis vil jeg blot tillade mig at være ydmyg over disse rammer, vi står i. Det er Arctic Circle Forum, rammerne, som er skabt af dem selv, herre præsident, og det er en fornøjelse at konstatere, at forumet her i Grønland har været et tilløbsstykke, og at de oprigtigt følger op med handling, hvad de har sagt med ord. Det er en stor ære for Inatsisartut og for Grønland som helhed at have besøg af en så stor politisk personlighed som dem, herre præsident. Præsidenten for Island gennem 20 år. Det har krævet sin viking, vil jeg tillade mig at sige, at takle de udfordringer, Island har oplevet gennem de seneste år. Og de har opnået en stor international anerkendelse for deres indsats under Islands finanskrise, og det har vist sig, at de har været den rette viking, for der er i særdeles en lys fremtid for Island, hvilket vi nøje har fulgt med i fra vores breddegrader. Vi er meget stolte og glade her i Grønland for det, vi har fulgt med i, fordi Island stod fast og ikke bukkede under for krav, men stod klippefast i troen på, at Island og Islands folk, det islandske folk, nok skulle klare sig gennem skærene. Den tur gennem skærene, hvor de også stod i front. De har en meget lang politisk karriere bag dem. Herunder har vi i Vestnordisk Råd nyt godt af deres velvilje og har formidlet vigtigheden af dette interparlamentariske samarbejde. De har meget afholdt i Vestnordisk Råd, hvilket vi forsøgte at give udtryk for under rådets 30-års jubilæum i Runavík på Færøerne sidste år ved at tildele dem den gyldne makrel, den første af sin art. Begrundelsen for overrækkelsen af denne specielle hædersbevisning var blandt andet den, at de vestnordiske lande herunder Grønland i særdeleshed var blevet sat på verdenskortet. Et af deres specielle kendetegn er, at deres bolig altid står åben for alle delegationerne i Vestnordisk Råd. Vestnordisk Råd har haft fornøjelsen af at være til middag i deres residens, og jeg skal ikke mindst nævne, at deres residens også har været åben og tage imod alle 11-årige skoleelever fra Østgrønland, der hvert år besøger Island for at lære at svømme. De 11-årige elever fra Østgrønland møder op i deres fineste tøj, og de giver dem en mindeværdig og uforglemmelig oplevelse. Vi ved, at der er valg til præsident i Island i næste måned, og så vidt jeg er orienteret, at de ikke blandt kandidaterne, at de har valgt og ikke er genopstillet et embede, de ikke blot er blevet valgt til, men er blevet betroet i 20 år. Det er altid vigtigt at have i erindring, at politikere, herunder naturligvis også præsidenter, bliver valgt af folket. Lytter man til sine arbejdsgivere, skal alt nok gå godt. Det har de gjort i 20 år, uanset at det ikke vil være at se blandt Islands politik, er jeg dog sikker på, at de vil lade andre benytte sig af deres store viden og erfaring efterfølgende, og det er derfor ikke farvel, men glædeligt gensyn. For jeg er sikker på, at vi kommer til at møde dem mange gange i forbindelse med Arctic Circle Forum, også Arctic Circle fremover. Herre præsident, må jeg tillade mig at bede dem om at komme herop, så jeg kan tildele den nationat i guld, som vi fra Grønlands parlament og fra Grønland gerne vil tildele den. Og jeg vil på vegne af Grønlands parlament og Grønlands selvstyre overrække dem.
Please sit down. Jeg takker min gode ven, præsidenten af det grønlandske parlament, og Grønlands selvstyre og det grønlandske folk. Den er stor ære. Min forbindelse med Grønland har varet gennem min præsidentstid. Og det var med stolthed, som jeg deltog, når Grønland fik selvstyre. Og det grønlandske folk her i Nuuk fejrede den store historiske begivenhed, når dronning Margrethe kom her til Grønland med selvstyreloven. Det glemmer vi ikke, som var der. Og det var en stor historisk begivenhed, ikke kun for Grønland, men for det hele arktiske område og for det hele verden. Denne ære, som nu har været overladt til mig, modtager jeg med en stor glæde og med stolthed. Og det indebærer også, at når jeg ikke længere er præsident, så skal jeg forsøgte at tjene Grønland som person, som aktivist, som deltager, og være med denne fremtidens rejse. Jeg er ikke klar over, hvor mange gange jeg vil tale dansk, når jeg kommer til Grønland i fremtiden. Men jeg gør det her nu, på grund af denne stunde her. I just want to say to the international participants who are here today, most of this gathering probably does not understand the language we have been using. But for me to receive this honor here today moves my heart beyond the words. I have received many orders and medals and decorations. Some of them come automatic with being a president. But the honor you have given me here today from the Parliament of Greenland and the people of Greenland has a very, very special place in my heart. And I see it also as a signal to others in my own country and across the Arctic, how we can, through what we do in our respective responsibilities, also serve the people of Greenland. So I will carry this with pride and with a warm heart. And I profoundly thank the Parliament and the government and the people of Greenland for this extraordinary, unexpected honor that you have given me here today. Så jeg siger tak, og det er et varmt tak. Og jeg vil aldrig glemme denne stunde her i dag. Tak.
And now I would like to introduce for you in Greenland, very famous singer, Ida Heinrich, who actually is educated in Iceland. She will sing a song in Greenlandic and another song in Icelandic. Ida will introduce, explain self what kind of things, what kind of songs she's going to sing, and she will be accompanied by Jim Milne. Please welcome Ida and Jim.
Siulliullugu atussavara nuannaqisaqaakka qupaloqarsuit. The first song I'm going to sing, the song is about the lovely qualities of spring. Tulliullugu atugassara islaannermiusuuvoq taanna ateqarpoq Drømmelandet. The next song is an Icelandic song, Drømmelandet. It means land of dreams.
Til hamingju, kære forseti, til hamingju med orðuna. Congratulations to the President of Iceland. Now please, the time schedule again. We have to leave to the lunch. Thank you very much for very exciting days. Thank you.